Today I would like to just share with you guys on a personal basis and just hash out a few things. And I'd just like to express to you guys my biggest frustration in being in this farming industry is the number of barriers I need to break as an individual just to do my job. Now, you see, this thing that I do, being in agriculture, farming, is a calling. It's something that I've wanted from a very young age, and it's something that I want to see myself doing forever. Now, we've spoken about some of my achievements, and that's just me starting it and being able to achieve those things just shows that there is room for possibility. Now, just to give you a brief background of myself, I was born in the 90s, so I was part of that first generation of young people to be living in this democratic new age, in this rainbow nation. So I was just like any other child. Grew up, I played with any other child of any color, actually. The only thing that differentiated me is obviously that I grew up in the suburbs. I didn't grow up in a rural area. Another thing that differentiated me, I didn't have any inheritable wealth or history, so I never had a concept of land. I never grew up on a farm, and that's what's made me different. But there's one thing that I will always treasure growing up, and that is the level of exposure my parents gave us as young people. And that just entailed from taking us to trips, going to the Kruger National Park, going to visit farms on weekends, and this is when my passion in agriculture started to grow. Another thing my parents taught us was consciousness, the ability to internalize one's inner self and understand one's surrounding. My dad would always ask us from a young age, do you guys believe you're free? And of course, when you're younger, you're like, yeah, we're free, we can do whatever, we live in this new democratic age. But the older that I got, I realized that there were a lot of things that I was not in control of that inhibited my freedom. And through that, and through learning and understanding agriculture, I started to question a lot of things. I wanted to find out, who's producing this food? How is it getting to us? Why do we think we're free when there's such a small fraction of individuals producing our food? It just doesn't make sense, And the global population of farmers has decreased from 35% to just 4.2%. That means something is happening. Something is going wrong. Now, the problem starts when you find young people like me, people who are passionate about agriculture, but the world is not ready for us. And we go in there and we think that, we're going to be just like anybody else, treated like a startup, we're going to get in there, get investors, and get this thing rolling. There's a different plan for us. Now, one thing that I always get asked is, why is there no youth in agriculture? And I'll speak from my own experience of what I've seen here in South Africa, and what I've seen interacting with other young farmers, hearing what their problems are and what are their frustrations. And the biggest problem we have here in South Africa is young people don't have access to finance. And finance in a term to say that, agriculture is a business. Money makes agriculture. Without access to finance or credit, you can't even start having a commercial contract. You can't even start thinking about purchase orders. You can't even start planning. So you find a young person like myself wanting to start, and you're not bankable, you don't have a credit history, you don't have an inheritance. Where do you begin? And another issue that I've seen is the generational knowledge. Young people right now, especially young people going into the commercial sector, most of them are first-generation farmers. So first-generation commercial farmers. So what does that mean? They're entering into a space where they have no contacts, they don't know anybody in the markets, they don't know how things are run, and they're facing many issues. Now, currently, if you see how policy is moving, there's a huge focus on subsistence agriculture. And I think we're missing the point. Because if we want to be feeding at least 8.5 billion people by 2030, we need to now start thinking really out of the box And you see in South Africa, we will separate it to say we have smallholder farmers, we have our emerging farmers, and we have a commercial sector. But the focus is there's no direct focus to say which area do we develop in order to say that we're going to be able to feed so many people. At the moment, private sector is not incentivized to develop young farmers. I'm still yet to meet a company or producer or processor that says they have a supply development program. Now, these type of things you'll find in the mining sector, because the mining sector cannot renew their DMR licenses without having, a good BE scorecard. They've developed enterprises, they developed supply, they've put people within their system. So now we land into agriculture here, and you get commercial companies approaching you saying, hey, I'm looking for a black supplier. I want a black supplier that can give me 10,000 cabbages per week. Now, where are you going to find that? Does that person really exist? Is that person sustainable? Do you understand where their business is, where they are? Are they going to continue supplying you? And these are the type of things that young people face. Now, the question begs to say, whose responsibility is it to make this investment? Who's going to make the risk to say that we're going to invest in young people and we ensure that these young people grow up to create sustainable enterprises? Now, that's a big question because the average age of a farmer in sub-Saharan Africa is 60 years old. So that shows that youth participation is minimal and it's very skewed. Now, after I've explained to you some complexities of the agricultural industry and what young people are facing, how do you expect young people to be interested and excited about all of that? It's a really tough one. Now, it begs to say that there's the land reform policy, and we have to understand that land reform is probably going to happen. Now, how can land reform be the solution? That's what everybody's asking, right? That's what everyone's debating about on radio, on TV. How is this going to all work out? People are still talking about the modalities. No one is talking about what is really happening at the moment. Now, land reform, we need to see it in a way where land is distributed efficiently, where land is still in production and is kept in production, and to ensure that land reform is a tool of economic development. I'd like to share with you a recent trip. I went to Zimbabwe a few weeks ago, and I had the opportunity to meet a white lady farmer by the name of Helen. Now, Helen and her family have been farming in Zimbabwe for about 100 years. And Helen owned about 4,500 hectares that was passed down to her, by her father to her and her brother. Now, during the land reform policy stage from 2002 onwards, Helen lost about 3/4 of a farm to local families. About 400 families, moved on to her farm. And in the beginning, due to the political agenda, the community and Helen were obviously not in communication. There was tension. It was a riled-up situation. But after visiting that farm in 2017, I saw a success story. I saw people working and learning from each other. Now, how the relationship developed there is that Helen's brother started showing the local farmers how to use tractors that were given to them by Brazilian NGOs. They showed them how to use them, maintain them, do basic things, what a tractor is meant to do. Then this relationship developed into a point where they were helping them source inputs efficiently, they linked them to markets, they helped them become surety so they can access finance. And this developed a relationship where they started exporting to Tesco's in the UK. They were producing beans, blueberries, as well as peas. And this relationship, what I saw of it, was equally beneficial and productive. As in, you went into the farm and you saw families having productive land, whatever unit size. There were pivots, there were smallholder units, there was cattle, there was everything. It looked like a community working. It looked like what land reform should look like. Now, this concept of shared value has been seen across agricultural communities across the world. And this concept is really comes about when people are forced to live and work together to enable them to be competitive as well as to address social issues. Now, shared value comes by when you create relationships with people and you leverage off that relationship. You allow yourself to be a specialist in your field, while another person is a specialist in another field. This has been extrapolated in a business management principle laid out by the Harvard Business Review on society and business. Now, how do we create these linkages in South Africa? How do we now start creating dialogue between private sector, research, producers, and the market? I think the best way that this could happen is obviously through legislative intervention. It has to be in the laws. Transformation cannot occur if, first of all, we are not forced to do it, and second of all, if we are not accountable. Because it's when people are not held accountable, that's when people don't want to, move. They don't want to change, They don't feel like, yes, there's a beautiful law that we're meant to follow, but we're not forced to do it. There's no accountability. Now, the concept of shared value is very important because we are able to create products that are energy efficient, labor efficient, and cost efficient. The way that we can be able to do that is when the Department of Agriculture starts incentivizing conservation agriculture. And once we start incentivizing such things is when we can start seeing the industry start changing the way they produce and the way they start looking at things. I'd like to give you an example of transformation, an example on my farm. My farm is in Modimolle. It's called Lekhaila Banaring Farms. I started farming in 2013 after I felt the need that I need to be in this industry. Now, I started off, yes, with bright eyes, thinking, yes, I'm going to be very successful at it. And I began, and then I started realizing that I don't have key skills to make my business viable. I cannot afford, to have all those people doing the right things at the right time. So what I did is I designed an experiential learning program. And basically what I did is I took unemployed graduates and I gave them a training platform, an incubator, where they spent about a year or 2 years doing an in-growing and outgrowing process. We focused on business skills, technical skills, and compliance skills. Now, what I like about my project and what other people say they liked about it is we don't realize the impact of something so small that I've done on 50 hectares. I've taken people that were previously excluded from the value chain in any kind of way and introduced them to a platform where they can be able to now test the knowledge that they've learned at school, but also have that experience and understand what it really means to be an agricultural entrepreneur. Now, my project by itself addresses all 17 Sustainable Development Goals set out by the UN to transform the world. Some of the development goals is the end to hunger, gender equality, equal access, decent work, and so that just shows that if we are able to think out the box, what we are able to do. Now, we also need to be looking at ways of how do we mitigate risks for farmers, especially young farmers. Financial agencies, as well as land banks, the Department of Finance, should be looking at how do we mitigate risk for producers to allow there to be more entrance into the industry. Now, the thing is that the whole concept of land in South Africa really, really needs to change. Land should be seen as a productive tool. It shouldn't be seen as a political agenda. It should be seen as a thing that we're going to be unlocking resources. We're going to be people. We're going to be healing people. We're going to be, building, making textiles. That's what land should be seen as. And the second thing is agriculture. People should not see agriculture as a thing of a person who is the plowing the fields. See agriculture for the whole value chain. They should see that there's a scientist involved, there is a manager involved, the person who's driving the truck, the person who's selling the meat. There's a whole value chain. And once we as people and as a country can realize that agriculture will be the tool to transform communities, then we realize that agriculture builds and agriculture does not destroy. Thank you.